Hello everybody. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kapil Gai, and I am the Senior Manager of Membership Engagement here at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thank you all for joining us this morning for our valued member Centennial College's workshop on leading with inclusion, empowering success through diversity. Today's enlightening webinar will help us discover the profound impact of inclusivity and gain the tactics needed to guide your organization towards a brighter and more inclusive future. Please note that today's session will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions while the webinar is going on, please post your questions in the chat, and we will answer your questions during our Q&A session at the end. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge this land on which we're meeting is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Though you could be joining us or watching from anywhere, the board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. They share with us a sense of responsibility for intergenerational equity, the well-being of today and tomorrow. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass over the mic to Michael and Richard from Centennial College so they can get things started. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks, Kapil. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Simons. I'm the Chair of Specialized Academic Certificates and Access Programming at Centennial College. And I'll have my colleague introduce himself, and then we'll dive right in.
And my name is Richard Williamson. I am one of the faculty members at Centennial, and really heavily engaged with a program that is specifically about leadership and inclusion. That's offered both at the undergraduate student level, but more specifically related to our conversation today, we offer this for people currently working in organizations at all levels and in all sectors. Michael?
Thanks, Richard. So as you see here, today we're going to be talking about empowering success through diversity and inclusion. And I really want to sort of begin to give you a framework around how that's going to work. So if we just go to the next slide, we'll begin to talk about, how do we begin to have that discussion. And one of the, even though it sounds relatively fundamental, one of the first things we always need to think about is, well, how do we begin? How do we start this? How do we incorporate this into our organization or as an individual? And often the feeling that we've encountered and heard about from participants in our programming is that, we're willing, but, what do we do? How do we do it? People recognize that it is important, that it is something that should be considered. It is something that can make an organization successful, but often one of the stumbling blocks is that they simply don't know where to begin. So we're just going to move on to the next slide. And, before we start, I think it's important to know, who are we? Why should you even be paying attention to us? I mean, here we are, a couple of people showing up today and to talk about something that's relatively new to some, complex to others. And one of the things we want to make sure you're clear about is that the snapshot of information you're going to get today is based on a variety of things. It comes from a variety of sources. And so you've met Richard. He's one of our faculty members, but all the faculty members that are involved with this type of program at Centennial, they have years of EDI expertise. And this is one of the things that certainly informs the kinds of things you're going to hear about today. We also have a program advisory committee that helps us understand the nuances, the changes, the needs, the unique situations that we need to be aware of when we're working with students. And that leads to regular curriculum updates. We understand this is an evolving sort of field. It's not the sort of thing where you set the curriculum, you set the ideas 5 years ago and hope that they're still relevant today. We're always trying to make sure that we're current and that the curriculum is updated. And one of the things that's allowed us to do is to be successful for the past decade. So it's important that, when you're listening to us today, that it comes from a place of some level of expertise, but we also invite questions and your sort of unique takes and understanding of what we're going to be talking about, excuse me. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Richard.
So thank you, Michael. And good morning and welcome to everyone. We're really glad that you're here. We're really passionate about this work, and we're hoping that you share that same kind of passion with us. Or maybe you'll feel a little bit more passionate even by the end of our talk this morning. Just to go back for a moment to something that Michael mentioned in terms of the people that we work with, there's an incredible willingness, interest in this type of work, around equity, diversity, and inclusion. But there's frequently, and the one theme I would say that emerges routinely in all of the work that we do is that we're interested, we're willing, but what do we do and how do we do it? And we're really hoping that even though this morning is going to be an overview, we're going to give you enough specific information that you will be able to take away some really specific ideas of what you can do, but also kind of launch something about a path forward. So one of the first things that we really focus on in our work is ensuring that we have shared understandings of the terminology we use, because that, again, is one of the things that I find in having done this work for many years now. Everyone brings different understandings of these terms. So I would like to just go through and tell you a little bit about some of the terminology we use and how we define it. Many of you may have seen this graphic before or some variation. It's all over the place on the internet, and that's where I grabbed this image. But I really like it because I think it captures an idea really well. And it really helps to inform the work that we talk about. So if you look at the third of it that says under the equality, the concept of equality still surfaces, but we have a really good understanding that equality really doesn't meet needs in the contemporary world, because everybody gets the same. And you see the three characters there, each standing on an equal box. It's certainly working okay for one person. It's partially working for the little individual in the red top. It absolutely doesn't work for the person in the purple top. Equity in the center image talks about people getting what they need specifically to enable them to approach things from a more equal starting point. So everyone's able to see this baseball game happening because they each one got what they need, and that's really what equity work is about. Sadly, the image on the right, reality, is truly I think a really nice representation of just exactly where different people's starting points are. And this may resonate with some of you, and things you've heard or people you've met or experiences you have had yourselves. So we need to work from a common understanding of terminology, and this is how we talk about equity. The next term that I want to look at is diversity, and this is a really, really sensitive one. We frequently have very, very big range of understandings or determination of what diversity actually means, and frequently it comes down to skin color or culture, and culture frequently is connected to a home country. We work with a much broader understanding of what diversity is, and the image that I've pulled in here is this nice iceberg. And it shows what they refer to as the waterline of visibility. You can see that skin color, gender, race, and age pierce the surface. So those are the things that we visibly can capture around the diversity or uniqueness of individuals. But the enormity of an iceberg, as we know, is what's below the surface. In other words, what can't be seen. And if you take a look at this image quite closely, I think you can likely connect with a number of things, relative to yourselves, aspects of yourselves that may be quite unique to you and not common to other people, but are still, really critical, valuable, and important aspects of who you are, but they're not noticed. And unfortunately, I sometimes in my work encounter people who will say things like, well, we need to hire more diverse people. And of course, my thinking is, well, everyone is diverse. Everyone is a mixture of different identities, as they, as you can see, represented from this iceberg. When I hear comments like that, I realize that I still have a lot of work to do in terms of guiding people to seeing people as more than one identity marker. None of us is a single aspect of our identity. We are a combination. And some of you and many of you may be familiar with the term of intersectionality, that we are all individuals of a number of identities, and those that we have intersections of identity. So it's a much more complex image of who we are. The really, really, I think, important takeaway from this is that there's no such thing as diverse people and non-diverse people. everyone is diverse because everyone is a combination of these identity markers. So that's something that we need to establish really early on in our work and in your own workplaces and the work that you do. Ensuring that you have some really good common definitions is incredibly helpful. So that takes us to our next image, what we talk about when we talk about inclusion. And I think this image works really, really nicely to convey that for you. So inclusion clearly is that idea of all the different colored dots connected within that one circle. The images below, exclusion, you can see all the green dots are in the center, but all of the other colored dots are outside. So they're really not, they're not included. They may be connected to, but they're not actually a center and at the forefront and really included. Segregation and integration, you can see, I think are probably, pretty self-explanatory how they work. Segregation being a dominant group and all others in a completely separate and segregated area. Integration's an interesting one because it's the dominant group, the large circle with the green dots, with, in a sense, a subgroup internal to it, but not really well connected. And this harkens back to a really, really interesting article that was written a number of years ago and interestingly published in Chatelaine magazine, talking about some of the challenges that multiculturalism brings, because multiculturalism really frequently focuses on differences. And while we want to acknowledge and recognize difference, we also don't want that to become the primary driver that we see people as being different from ourselves in a way that separates and creates something like integration. So that if I can just draw your eyes back to that inclusion circle at the top, that's really what our aim is. Everybody's together, everyone is, interacts and engages, and we're on a plane together so that we're not, some elevated, some not. That's really ultimately our goal. So clarifying these terms is really helpful for us in terms of, starting the conversations, because if we don't have common understandings, then we're really working at cross purposes. So ultimately, what we're looking for in our working definition is that in a workplace, and that's really what we're talking about here today, workplaces and leadership in workplaces, our working definition is really simple. Everyone feels valued, respected, and included. But we have a challenge. That's a really admirable thing to say. Everyone feels valued, respected, included, but there are barriers. And the barriers are things that we really need to focus on and understand and then begin to dismantle if we truly want to move towards inclusion where everyone does feel valued, respected, and included. So let's take a quick look at a little bit about barriers. So I've brought back that image of the iceberg with all those different identity markers. And those identity markers are where barriers can exist. So barriers generally exist relative to these different markers. So there could be barriers relative to skin color, barriers relative to gender, barriers relative to sexual orientation, family status, any of those identity markers. So one of the things we want you to think about is in order to feel valued, respected, and included, our working definition of inclusion, we need to address the barriers that we face, that are based on our identities. And I would like to just, for a moment to give some thought to this question. What barriers have existed for you in your workplace? And they could be relative to any of those. So I'm hoping that many of you are already thinking some of these things, that barriers relative to identity markers, whether those are visible or not. So give that question in red, what barriers have existed for you in your workplace? Just give that a moment's thought. Unfortunately, it's just a moment, so we will be moving on. But we're going to give you an idea of sort of where we're aiming. So when we think of equity, diversity, and inclusion and the barriers are really critical because that's what defines what we need to do. We go by the work of George Day. So George Day is actually an academic from Toronto. And this one quotation in the center is just captures so beautifully what our idea is. And I'm hoping that this is something you'll be able to take away. So inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It is making a new space, a better space for everyone. Now that's pretty lofty, that's pretty ambitious, but it's something that I think that we need to keep in our minds, that we're not really sort of saying, well, we're going to bring you into what we currently have. And then, what happens with situations like that is then people feel a very, very strong pressure to modify themselves, code switch, for example, into ways that things are done. So what we're aiming at is a new space, or a space that has been rethought into such a way that people don't need to change who they are and fully adapt and adopt the norms of an organization, so that they can be comfortable in working and thriving and feeling valued, respected, and included. Again, we go back to that kind of working definition that we have. The one word that's really key here, and really can't emphasize this enough, is the final word, everyone. So I think George really just so brilliantly pulled this together, that inclusion's not about taking something that exists and adding in some more people. So let's get a few people from this group and from that group and bring that group, and then, okay, we're good now. We've brought in some diverse people. It's really shifting workplaces and workplace cultures into being places where everyone can feel valued, respected, and included. So again, big and lofty goals, but really important, because they're really fundamental to who we are as human beings, and who we are fundamentally as people is important in our workplaces. We do great work, and we feel we valued, and we feel that we contribute when we can feel that way in our workplaces. So our challenge, and a lot of the work that we actually do at Centennial, is exactly this, digging deeply into, so what do we do? How do we create these better spaces? I'll be honest, and I'm sure it's no surprise, this is not easy work. It takes a lot of thought, it takes a lot of commitment, and it takes time. So it's not going to be, it's not something that where you can do an activity or throw something into place and then it starts to work. So the focus that we have in particular is on inclusive leadership. And we need to be attentive for a moment with the word leadership. This does not necessarily mean formal positions. So it's not something that you have a title and suddenly you're a leader. Truly, anyone can be a leader. And when we really examine, closely organizations and workplaces and workplace cultures, there are many, many leaders, some of them very positive, people at all sorts of different levels within an organization. Some of them contribute wonderfully to the work. Some of them take away from it. So I've been very privileged in my career to be able to be engaged heavily in this work, but I've also had management roles in the past where I've managed fairly large staff on my own as a single manager. And I've certainly come to see how there can be leaders who are not formal in any way and who can be very strong leaders in positive ways, and people equally who can be strong leaders in not positive ways. We want to bring those people on board. We want them to use their leadership in very specific ways. To start with, we're probably looking at more formal leadership roles in a sense to kickstart things. But as well, one of the things that we really need to think about is for leaders to be inclusive, there's some really fundamental skills. There's some knowledge that's needed, there are some skills, and there are also dispositions. And so while we speak into those specifically, I highlighted the word courage because I would say that, yes, this work takes courage. So it's really not for the faint of heart. And I think it's truly something that we can expect of leaders to be courageous in doing this work. That doesn't need to be too difficult, because if your heart really is in it, then it happens. If you're doing it in a perfunctory way, it's probably not going to happen. So let's take a look at some of the knowledge sets that we have. One of the really key aspects of the knowledge is understanding what the issues are. And that's a really big, significant piece that we engage with in our work, is really starting to build a good foundational breadth of knowledge, because it's much more than simply those visible identity markers. It's not just about gender, it's not just about race or culture or country of origin. There are many more aspects. So fully understanding what the issues are is something that is really critical. So the issues need to be known and the issues need to be understood. The second point here, have knowledge of the why. We need to know why we're doing this work. Is it purely for moral, ethical reasons? Is it, something that's, very personal? Is it something organizational? Is it connected to a business case? So having knowledge of the reasons why you do this work, and we will get into some of the business cases, that's incredibly helpful to work with. Another knowledge aspect that's needed is the steps to take and the order of the steps that are taken. So later I'm going to be suggesting to you that, yeah, indeed you plunge, dive into this work, don't stop, don't wait for like the perfect day. But you do need to know how change happens. You need to understand how people operate. So there are some big knowledge pieces that are really important. Those frequently come, with your own professional learning related to leadership. But you can add in this equity, diversity, and inclusion aspect to it without much difficulty at all. So knowledge areas, some very specific skills areas. One skill is the ability to envision, what does this actually look like? Pushing forward without some clarity is frequently misguided, and we frequently see misguided efforts that take organizations in different directions. That if they're brief or short-term visions, they sometimes can be actualized, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, and then they fizzle away and they die out. That's really dangerous because it does damage to this work and all the language connected to it. So being able to envision long-term, what is this going to look like when we're all finished? What's happening in the organization? What are people doing? How are people interacting with each other? Visible behaviors. So being able to envision that and then begin to articulate it. The second point, the skills to bring about change successfully. We, in our work at Centennial, we partnered with Harvard University on this change management work, because we really want the people we work with to have a deep understanding of the complexities of change management. And it's not just following, a particular model, like the Cantor model or the ADKAR model. Models are really helpful, but actually diving into doing the work and understanding the human relations that are, that play into change as well. So our work with Harvard is really interesting in terms of how we build knowledge and capacity to understand change well beyond the models. And I think the final skill is understanding, like having the skills needed to build inclusion, which means having a really clear picture of what inclusion means. So if we go back to George Day, building a new space, not bringing people into an existing space, but building a new space that is beneficial to everybody. So nobody's feeling squeezed out, nobody's feeling neglected or forgotten about, or like, oh, I have to step aside for someone else. Because that is a common type of refrain that we hear. And that's really not what this work is about. It's not squeezing people out in favor of others, as much as we may hear that from time to time. So there's a knowledge base that's required, there's a skill base, but also a dispositional base that's essential. So I've stated it here in terms of, I want a successful workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and included. So that's, the disposition is the desire for that to happen. Another disposition, I'm not afraid to do the work. So that speaks to the, our road sign of courage. As well, I'm not afraid to make mistakes. And if you're not afraid to make mistakes, then there's a certain humility attached. And humble leadership is really effective leadership. When you can slip up, you can make a mistake, you can do something wrong, accept it readily, admit the mistake, and then draw on the knowledge and skills of the people you work with, that gives a lot of credibility to you. So not being fearful or feeling the need always to have all the right answers for everybody all the time. So not being afraid, but also and feeling comfortable to be able to make mistakes and to learn from them. So one of the knowledge areas was that around business cases. And so I want to speak very specifically to those quickly, but specifically. So this is the type of knowledge base that we would talk about, the ROI or the return on investment for inclusive leadership. So just a few helpful points here. Organizations that focus on diversity and inclusion gain a quantifiable boost in employee engagement. So yes, it absolutely, equity, diversity, inclusion work is a moral and ethical choice and action. It also actually has good business results. And in the work that we do, we have found that this is frequently a really powerful starting point to get people on board. We get their heads on board with some of the information you'll be seeing on this slide. You know, things like about boosting employee engagement. You know, oh, now you've got me listening. And then we get to their hearts eventually, but we may need to start with their heads. But as long as we're going to get to our destination in the end, that's probably what's really important. A few other pieces, just quickly, some bits of information from research. Companies with diverse leadership teams, so again, you know, diverse, a mixture of people, outperform less diverse organizations. 15% higher for gender diversity, 35% higher for ethnic diversity. So that came out of McKinsey. Organizations with more women in board positions outperform peers. Now, that's probably not a surprise to a lot of you, but here it is, it's a fact. You know, that was studied, that was research. We have all of this research. I'm just giving you a single line from it. So Catalyst brought that information forward for us. Team-based assessments of inclusive teams show 80% better results. Deloitte does a lot of work in this, and Deloitte Australia specifically. Wonderful material that they come out with, well-researched, terrific studies, very helpful. But the improved results from inclusive teams is really quite remarkable. You may be thinking in your own mind, some of the the teams that you have, are they inclusive, and do they do better work than the non-inclusive teams? And then again, another one from Deloitte, not Deloitte Australia this time. Inclusive talent systems as a talent strategy best predict the highest performing companies. So when inclusive talent systems are intentionally done as a talent strategy, those organizations outperform. So for those who need the business case as opposed to the moral ethical case, here it is, and there's loads more where this comes from. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specific about what do you actually do. So we talked about knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So some of the things that are important and necessary for you to be doing. This work we frequently talk about is it starts with yourself. It's not sort of what you're going to do or expect of others or things you put in place. You really do need to start with yourself. You need to know, whether it's you or people in your organization, that they have done this work and that they have done this thinking and they have engaged in it themselves and come to their own understandings of their own positions, potentially their biases, their identity markers, how they're similar or different to other people. So the work really, really starts with ourselves, always starts with ourselves. We need as well to be able to, and this is I just think an interesting thought, to embrace the paradox of individuality and group identity. And because we sometimes get that toggling between, oh, well, we have to focus on the individual and each individual's wants and needs and how they're unique. Oh, but we're also a team or a group. So how do you toggle between those? How do you embrace that paradox? So that's a key thing that's really valuable in just in terms of your own thinking. How does that work? How do we see people as individuals within the group? Challenging thoughts, but again, a lot of this work is thinking work. It's not sit down and write reports work. It's thinking, and a lot of that thinking comes out of great quality conversations. The skill to envision, frame, and create positive change. I spoke about that a little bit earlier with the work that we do with Harvard around change management. So it's the ability to envision, that long-term vision, frame things for people, which framing frequently involves including people in that so that there's a full understanding of what's happening, and then how to create the positive change. Using models and other aspects that clearly can be learned. Change management is a pretty critical skill. Fostering true meritocracy, and I would say that if you're really operating on a true meritocracy frame, it's not only what you're doing, but it's also what you are seen to be doing. So that people in the organization have great confidence that people are that their careers and their work and an invitation to projects, whatever it happens to be, it's based on truly on the merits of their knowledge and skills and abilities, and not on other perceived aspects of like why they may have been invited in or promoted or whatever. Using inclusive processes. This is one of the probably the most impactful and immediate kinds of things that you can do. I strongly recommend the use of inclusive facilitation kinds of processes. For myself, when I'm working with people and not just speaking as I am this morning, this is not my standard kind of approach. I like the work of Ingrid Benz. She has just done some terrific work on how to facilitate work in organizations in a whole range of ways, and all of them are highly inclusive. So facilitation skills, a facilitative approach to work, is a wonderful way to get started, and it doesn't have to be under an EDI heading or department or team. It can be anybody, anywhere, anytime, but very, very effective. So that's a piece that, you know, even independently can be worked on. Sourcing and utilizing data. One of the things that we'll talk about is goal setting and having some measures and metrics. So what data do we need or want that's going to help us? How then do we use that data? And then how do we cycle back? How do we measure, you know, on an ongoing basis? Do we see improvements or not? All those sorts of data questions that come up. But using data is pretty critical in this work. Building relationships and developing people. All of us in the different, you know, in the different locations we have within our organizations can be doing this. And it is an aspect of leadership. This actually comes from the Ontario Leadership Framework that was created by Ken Leithwood and his team. So building relationships with people, sustaining those, and those relationships can then develop other people. So we're really cultivating and nurturing the growth, learning, and skill development of others. Securing accountability, that's both securing our own personal accountability to the work that we do, our accountability towards others, and our accountability within the organization. And, you know, what we do, what we contribute, and how do we assess that, and how do we report it, and how do we then celebrate it as well. Leading and improving core business. Inclusive leaders in their work lead and improve core business. So that's never a part that we have to leave out. All of us in our work, we're not setting aside our core work in order to do inclusion, equity, diversity work. We are leading and we're improving our core business, but we're doing it in an inclusive way that fosters and cultivates inclusion within the workplace. So we're never ignoring or leaving behind the actual work of our organizations. And to that point, developing the organization to support the core business. So this is very connected to developing people. So we're committing to the work of the organization, but we're just doing some of that work in a different way. In many ways, it's inclusion work is shifting how we do work, but it's not taking the work away, or it's not taking a focus away from the work. So they actually are married. And that marriage of inclusion work and focusing on core business work, that's where the magic happens, and it's doable. I don't like to sort of tell my own experiences, but I have to say I've done it and it works. It truly works. It is a journey for sure, but it's an exciting one, and you know, there's unlimited growth that can happen here. It does work. And finally, for this one, we're going to talk about personal leadership resources. Again, this comes from the Ontario Leadership Framework by Leithwood and company, or team, he's not a company. Personal leadership resources are things like optimism, resilience, perseverance. We need those. We need our personal leadership resources just as aspects of our kind of character or personality and the dispositions that we bring to the workplace. Okay, so talking of dispositions, it's the dispositions in many respects are the will. And I'd like to just draw your attention to the graphic for a moment here. You can see these are, well, you can see it just at the top. I managed to capture that title for this image. Again, it's from Deloitte. The 6 signature traits of an inclusive leader. So inclusive leaders demonstrate curiosity. They're interested, they're curious, they find out. And curiosity is a person who takes on a learning stance. So they're not the ones who know everything, they're the ones who present themselves as learners. So that's an element toward becoming an inclusive leader, when you don't have all the answers, but you sure have the questions. Cultural intelligence, there's an awareness of, a workplace culture, but also that individuals all come from their own cultures. And culture not just being country of origin, but it could be cultures related to the identity that we saw back in that, in the iceberg. So different aspects of who we are in many cases, cultural aspects. Maybe the people we socialize with, our family members, the kind of backgrounds that we have, maybe educational background, upbringing, if we were raised in wealth or poverty, all of these are in a form cultures. So awareness of those cultures and having cultural intelligence, understanding those is helpful. Collaboration, again, this speaks to what I mentioned just a moment ago about facilitative processes. We build facilitative processes for the purpose of collaboration, bringing people together, drawing on all their unique talents to do better work. And you'll remember one of the returns on investment was, that when there's collaboration with well-integrated and diverse teams, they are more successful than non-diverse teams. Commitment. This is not work for the faint of heart. You don't give it up because it gets hard. You stick with it, but you share that burden a bit with others, and you let them know, this is hard work, but I'm not stopping. This is important. We need to, carry it on. We may need to shift our speed or our, the scope of our work at periods of time, depending on, the ups and downs of things that are happening. But we don't let go of the commitment. It's always there. We don't drop it when the going gets tough. It just maybe takes a slightly different position in the car. And again, courage. It's interesting that courage, resurfaces as a signature trait of a leader. If we don't have courage, then we don't really have, in a sense, the determination and drive to carry through. And cognizance, and generally, cognizance of bias is really is the thing that that's such an important thing. So unconscious bias training is a really helpful thing, as long as everybody's involved in that, and not just the people that we think they need to have unconscious, but not us. They need to have unconscious bias. It's only when we include ourselves. And you remember my comment earlier about we start with ourselves. Well, if we want someone to look at unconscious bias, we do it ourselves first, and we talk about it and we're open about it before we would expect others. So I think this image might capture a little bit of kind of how you're feeling when you're thinking about your current work and thinking, okay, and all of these things I'm saying might lead you to either look like this person or feel the way she's probably feeling. Is this only the work for leaders to do? Is it really only for them? And I put this slide in purposefully because this is a question that comes up so frequently for me that people thinking, well, when they start doing it, or when they need to do this and they need to do that. No, this is for all of us, and each of us, if we draw on our commitment and our courage, we then can take some steps toward helping move this forward. It's really exciting when people I get to work with do decide to take steps forward and approach leadership, and frequently they're very surprised when they take forward some good ideas. So it is everyone's work to varying degrees. Some will maybe be leading it, some will be funding it, others will be driving it, other ones will be supporting and spreading the word. So different people will take on different kinds of roles, but all of us are involved. And it speaks to a quotation from a wonderful writer, Margaret Wheatley. She's also, in a sense, like a consultant for businesses. And she talks about one of her really famous lines that I just love is, invite everyone who cares. So if we invite everyone who cares, then we start to spread this work around to everybody. And that could be kind of infectious. So where to now? How to engage everybody? Well, First off, that old saying, context is everything. So I put that at the top of the list. So yep, context is pretty darn critical. You need to know your context. We can't tell you what exactly to do, because you need to look and identify what your context is and know then what barriers may exist, what pathways may exist, what could be done, when, what speed. We spoke about the knowledge that's needed, how to engage people, but also, what's the timing, what's the tone of the workplace. So the drawing of those knowledge elements that you have, the skills you have, there are some specific engagement types of skills, so like what I've talked about, Ingrid Benz and her facilitation skills work. The dispositions, that's when it goes to us individually. What are the kinds of dispositions that we have? Do we carry those traits of the 6 signature traits of inclusive leaders? If we carry those dispositions of curiosity and commitment and courage, then we are on a path to being able to engage people. Ongoing learning. There isn't much talk these days about learning organizations, and there was much more talk in past years about organizations being learning organizations. And this is a really key piece, that this is not work that happens with a few workshops or like a committee that goes off and does something, but none of us are really quite sure. Ongoing learning is, for everybody at all levels, done collaboratively, done together, as best possible. Setting goals. You don't get very far, you don't make much headway if you don't have some specific goals that you're working with, and then some follow-up measures to see where progress was made or not, why was progress made, and so what did we do, what should we repeat because it worked well, where did we not meet goals, why not, are there things that maybe we should avoid in future. Participation, again, think about that quotation from Margaret Wheatley, invite everyone who cares. So when do we start? Just get going, okay? Don't wait for the right day. There's no right time. There's not the right day. It's not, a week from Tuesday. It's not, when the spring comes. It's not when this project finishes. You can start it as simply as just opening up conversations. You intended this, this talk today. Take it back. Start talking it up in the office. You get those things going. So not to be afraid of it. Include everybody. This is not just thought and discussion and ideas for a particular group. It truly is for everyone. And then together, when you have these conversations, determining together, what do we need to do? What do we need to learn? What are some of those skills, and knowledge sets that we need to have that would really guide us in this work? The things that I spoke earlier about knowledge sets, skill sets, and dispositional sets. And then get going on it. Now, I hope that tone doesn't sound too flippant, because I'm not flippant at all with this. But I think I'm maybe hoping to bring us back to a point of, as much as there's an awful lot of content in this talk that I've just done, there's also an understanding that we can't do everything and prep and plan and then kind of have a launch date. For certain things, there may be launch dates, but in general, this work is everybody's work all the time, and we can engage in it at any point. And at least we can get, and because what we're doing is then we're reconstructing, in a sense, the context in which you're in, so that you can then move forward, maybe with somewhat more fertile fields to be sowing the seeds. Thank you for listening to all this. I normally don't speak at great length without back and forth and discussion. So this is a bit of a challenge, and I'm sorry I hope you're not feeling that it's been an information dump, but maybe some great nuggets. We would like to turn it over to questions now. So Kapil, I think you were looking at the chat and picking some along the way.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you, Richard. That was a wonderful presentation. Very informative, even for myself and the work that I do every single day. Amazing. So thank you for this content. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat if you'd like for me to submit the questions to Richard. Otherwise, feel free to raise your hand in the meeting. And what I'll do is I can unmute you and you can ask Richard yourself, whatever works for you. Richard, I actually did have a few questions.
Oh, sure.
So there was a question that I remember at some point in the presentation, there was a slide where there's a few different circles where you had differentiated between integration, segregation, and inclusion. It was very well laid out. But I wanted to ask, is it common for people to kind of get confused or maybe not get confused, but to mistake or get confused between integration and inclusion? Is that common, you feel?
Um, Not so much with those words attached, but I would say that the thinking would reflect that.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, there is this idea, and I think I may have commented, but, kind of hurriedly, there sometimes is that idea that, here we are, we're a group, we're an organization, we're a team, whatever. And, oh, we need to diversify. And, that's, maybe like a bit of a checkbox for us. So let's hire one of these, one of these, one of these. And, so then now we're diverse. Or we have the diverse representation, within our group or team or department. That can end up being very much, that integration where, there's a kind of a group within the larger group, but that group stays kind of isolated. I've experienced that myself, and it's really interesting to observe. It's unsettling to be part of, because you don't feel connected to other people. At least that for me, my sense was being connected. But it's a little bit of that, we should get some of them to join us. And that's, something I'm really uncomfortable with. This is not about getting them to join us. This truly is about, fully integrating everybody together. So it's not an us and them kind of perspective. Is that sort of where you were, where your thinking was coming from?
Yeah, because I think that honestly, like I think that it comes from a genuine place where people are looking to, do the work and to do better. But sometimes I think maybe people can kind of make that mistake along the process.
And and to your point, this is, I think, something like ultimately what we're aiming for is inclusion. It's not sort of like, oh, we're not inclusive now, we're going to do all these things and then we'll be inclusive. It's a process, and it may start with integration, but once you've got integration, you see, okay, so we've got all these people together, but this group is over here and this group is over there, and like group people are sort of subdividing themselves. I've seen that. It's quite unsettling for me. Then okay, so we brought people together in one place, but they're still separating themselves. So then we look at, so okay, now we need to move in a direction to kind of bring people together so there's more mixing. And that's where I really, really like the work of Ingrid Benz, because her facilitation work, and I mean, this is like the third or fourth time I've mentioned, I can't speak highly enough about facilitation processes that integrate and include people. So I would say, yeah, when integration happens, you still have some work to do to move toward inclusion.
No, and I thank you for breaking that down. We do have some comments and questions in the chat, Richard.
Sure.
So Monica mentioned that she also was a fan of the inclusion slides and the iceberg as well. And there is a question. Sorry, I'm just bringing this down here. There's a question from Rose. Her question is, when you talk about the work being for everyone, how do you recommend sharing or conveying this message to senior leadership?
Yeah, this is a question that comes up a lot in the work that we do at Centennial. And I would say that one of the things that like I found in my own experience, like as an employee in a workplace when I was, pretty new, and what I would still advise, I think maybe because those things worked well for me, but to put together some thoughts, ask for a little bit of time and just take the ideas forward. Now, that's kind of like the simple, the simple version of the answer. But in a sense, have a purpose, have a point. If you're not seeing that things are happening, if you see that there are barriers, then you're taking that idea forward. I've been hearing about it, I've been looking at it, I've been reading about. inclusion work, it looks like it could be valuable and helpful for us. I'm seeing some issues kind of in our organization or team or department. And I'd just like a few minutes to discuss those with you. So I've actually coached a couple of people on this, and it has been hugely successful. The reaction usually is that I find is that people say that they were really surprised at how incredibly well received. One recently, someone said to me that when they took this idea forward, the person they took it to said, you know what, I've been struggling with for a long time. I haven't talked about it, I haven't said anything, but I've been thinking about it so much, and it's really interesting you came forward. So this person just felt like she wrote to me right after the meeting, and she said it was just like an incredible experience for her, because it was like she felt embraced by this person that she had been a little bit hesitant about going to, but they were struggling with it. And one thing that I always find really valuable is if you can connect it in some way to the organization's mission, vision, values, commitments, whatever the organization is saying. I looked at our organization's mission, and we talk about diversity and inclusion. I'm like, what kinds of things are we doing? Because that really appeals to me. That's valuable for me. I see a need for that. So connecting it to things the organization says it believes in, that's a really helpful tool as well. Or referencing some of the the research, the Deloitte, McKinsey, and Catalyst work, that I mentioned on one of the slides.
Yeah,
there are ways to take it forward.
There's an interesting term I heard once. Someone said to me, find a way to speak to their listening, and understand, as Richard suggests, what is it that the organization values, and there's places where that's written, there's places where that's communicated informally, and how can you, if you're looking for a way, how can I frame what I have to say in a way that the organization goes, okay, when I hear that fits with some of the other thoughts I have about how we want to be as an organization, and this new information may help us get there. So there's always there's a bit of research, but you take your own experience within that organization and you look around, you pay attention, you see what's important, and if you can frame it, all the better.
Yeah, and to Michael's point, I think if this is a person who's going to hear their return on investment, then you start with that. If they're going to hear the company mottos, mission, vision, values, then you can work with that. So there are different kinds of entry points. So I think it was Rose who asked that question. Rose, I hope that's something helpful.
Yep. So no, Rose is thanking you for that. Awesome. Well, Michael and Richard, I want to thank you all on behalf of the board and everyone who attended today. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. This is definitely work that we need to always be active in, and we really appreciate you all coming out today. So we will be actually putting this recording on our YouTube channel, and so please look out for that. And we hope everyone has a wonderful day. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. All right, have a good weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.